Hi, everyone. I'm John Kenlon, publisher at DSN. I'm with Danny Sanchez, CEO at Empirics Health, and John Ridyard, president at Empirics. Thanks for doing this, gentlemen. Nice to see you.
Thank you, John. Likewise.
Thanks for having us.
So, Empirics helps plan sponsors save on drugs without compromising care. Empirics leads with clinical insights, smart data, real human connection. And at the end of the day, the approach um, improves patient outcomes and it puts members first. And I think you have plenty of data to support that. NACDS Annual, one of the biggest shows in the industry, is taking place in late April. And no doubt PBMs will be a key topic, especially the three big PBMs. And why do you think Empirics, as a mid-market PBM company, is having growing success with pharmacy and grocery chains?
It's a great question, John. And I think it all starts with the fact that we depend on the pharmacist to execute in our model, right? We put the pharmacist at the center of care, and we really leverage the second most trusted healthcare professional out there, to help patients, and our technology allows us to serve those patients up for intervention. So while other PBMs are out there pushing volume, trying to monetize as much as they can, the way that we look at the problem is not by putting more meds out in the market. It's by, hey, let's use the pharmacist to intervene on prescribing to make sure patients are in the right therapy. And if we can do that, then we're on the right side of healthcare and we're saving everybody money. Often, and I think I mentioned this in a prior interview, often I think, I feel very comfortable when my parents are sick, when I send them to the hospital. I feel like when my parents are at the hospital, a little elderly, they've got a care team with them. They've got a PharmD, they have a nurse practitioner, they have a doctor, and that doctor's working together they're working together as a care team, and they're trying to treat patients using everybody's expertise to put the patient on the right therapy, on the right medication. And then, when you step into the outpatient world and you don't have that level of treatment anymore, primary care, huge shortages in primary care physicians. You're in and out of the doctor's office in 10 minutes because they have to see as many patients as possible to stay profitable. You've lost that connection to what's the best therapy for the patient. The doctor only has pharma to rely on for the most part. Pharma reps come in, they educate them on the latest and greatest therapy. They fail to sometimes share how expensive those therapies are, which that impacts adherence. Well, here's Empirics, doing it differently. We bring the pharmacist to the center. We see this prescribing happening. We leverage our clinical pharmacists. They call the physician, they educate the physician, and they put the patient on a better therapy. And so why does that resonate within NACDS? Well, it's an environment where we have a lot of very smart pharmacists, or very, very, very smart pharmacy leaders who are out there who want to do something different. And so we're bringing that forward. And honestly, PBMs are beating up on retail pharmacies all the time with reimbursement. Moving your PBM is the one leverage point that you may have against the PBM. So why are you using the big three for your own team's benefits, right? For your own healthcare benefits versus using a PBM that's putting the pharmacist at the center of care. And I think that's the challenge that we've posed to that market, is saying, hey, how you can push back today against poor practices of PBM is not giving them your own business.
Yeah, that's you mentioned a thing that's so important to, I think, to the retailers, being part of the care team. So you talked about Empirics being clinically driven when it comes to pharmacy care, and it's a key differentiator for the company. Why do you think pharmacist-led operating approach is gaining traction in today's really hyper-competitive PBM market?
I don't think it's the most novel idea in the world, right? To say if you're taking a pharmaceutical therapy, that a pharmacist should be involved in trying to deliver on the best best care for that patient. I think it's unfortunate that it isn't centered to care across all patients in the U.S. that are receiving a pharmacy benefit. So I think that truly what we're trying to do is really understand as much as possible about the patient through use of all the technology that we have available, present that information in front of a clinical pharmacist that has the time and the incentive and the desire to go and intervene when care isn't right, and then has the right and the ability to go and spend the time to have the conversations as a colleague with physicians about the most appropriate path forward for that patient. I think the thing that's really special about that is goes back to Danny's comment on why we think this care team situation is what we're trying to recreate, right? I mean, it's frustrating that in the hospital, when you're all on the same team, you've got amazing collaboration between pharmacist, clinician, and everyone else in the care team. You leave the hospital and all of a sudden you're dealing with a pharmacist that's removed from an individual patient, and a PBM that tries to manage pharmacy with rules as opposed to clinical oversight. That creates a relationship that is unfavorable between prescriber and PBM and pharmacist. What we want to do is go back to that kind of trusted advisor and collaboration, where our pharmacists can't call a doctor to tell them what to do unless they have a really good idea and all of the data and documentation to support that decision. And all of a sudden you get a lot more receptiveness from the physicians to say, that's right. And honestly, I wish I had you on my team for all of my patients, not just the ones that are served by Empirics. So that's really what we're trying to push as an opportunity for both the health of the member as well as the ability for our plan sponsors to pay for the best benefits they can.
Yeah, so clearly bigger isn't always better, and you guys seem to have more of a personal touch. So we hear there may be a big announcement at NACDS annual. Is there something that you can share with us now?
We have secured the business of one of our big retail chains at NACDS, and I believe we'll have that announced just before NACDS, and so we'll share who that is. But I do want to highlight that it takes the first big chain to jump in and realize it and be kind of a luminary in the space and say, what, I see it and I want to participate. I want to do something different. So very proud of this partner coming on board. And I think it's the first of many. And honestly, we're going to do some great things together that I think it's going to change the space. If we have enough, across in the future, this is ambitious of me, but if we have enough chains playing together in the future, at what point can we break away from these abusive networks, and then give that opportunity to say, hey, let's partner together. Let's bring the chains together so we can play in a safe space where reimbursement is fair, and not only reimbursement for medications, but reimbursement for interventions. Because we have proven, if Empirics has proven anything, is that employers are willing to pay for the pharmacists to jump in and help put patients on the right therapies, and nobody else is doing that. And so, if you needed a model to show that, hey, will people pay for pharmacists to engage? Yes, we're here. We can show you that.
All right. Well, as soon as you're ready to make the announcement, please send me the press release, because we want to do a breaking news on that. So we look forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, you asked earlier why we think that this is the right segment. I think Danny highlighted, this is such an overwhelming decision, I think, for people making decisions around benefits, and pharmacy is where you've got leaders and clinicians that can validate the overall model. And I think we're very excited to explain to the entire industry, this partner that we have. But probably most important is that they'll be able to say the service was great, the transition was what we expected, and they're delivering on both the clinical and financial outcomes that they promised at the beginning. To me, that's the most important thing. Is it's not coming from us; it'll be coming from the peers in the industry, being able to reference an actual example about such an important decision for their organizations.
John Ridyard, I know you have another big announcement related to a new pharmacy care network called Ally RX. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, we're very excited to launch Ally RX. Ally RX is a national network of pharmacy and grocery chains that we're working with collaboratively to improve the pharmacy benefits care for their employees, their customers, and their local partners. It's it's really us listening to that segment of the market about their needs and further introducing our pharmacist-led clinical service model, as well as our technology platform to better serve customers through those networks.
So the big three that we've been talking about, they've controlled anywhere from 80 to, I guess, 90% of the business, but obviously that's changing, and it looks like it's changing pretty fast. Why is Ally RX such an important step forward for pharmacy and for grocery chains who have typically partnered with these larger traditional PBMs to manage the pharmacy benefit plans for their own employees?
So yeah, I'd say that Ally RX is important for a few reasons. The first is what Danny just highlighted, the desire to have your patients have access to a network of pharmacies that treats that network of pharmacies fairly. And that would require some scale to be able to not force some scale to be able to say I can actually create access to all the patients that I need to provide access to on a network that behaves in a way that all pharmacists together can agree is beneficial. I think the other thing that's really important is a vision for pharmacists to get paid for the work that they do in a reasonable manner. And instead of trying to push the work that pharmacies do closer and closer to a commodity type market from a pricing perspective, instead try to pull that away and hopefully push some of the meaningful clinical interventions on their patients and on the Ally RX Network's patients, like we would do with our pharmacists today, back into the pharmacy. So essentially not waiting for someone else to figure out how to drive reimbursement into the pharmacy channel as a whole, but instead figure out how to, as a network, deliver services that are paid for appropriately for the value that they create.
So shifting gears just for a moment, what are some of the major PBM related legislative and regulatory actions being considered in Congress? I know there was a lot at the end of the year. People thought there would be some big changes that ended up getting postponed, but there seems to be a lot of bipartisan support for PBM reform. But nothing's really happened. It's stalled. What's Impurex Health's position on these PBM reform measures? What do you think's going to happen?
I think if you ask me, I would love to see what Elizabeth Warren's been working on as far as vertical integration going away. I don't think that anybody should control both sides of the equation. It's abusive. It allows them to ship dollars from one side to the other, putting mid-market PBMs in a very disadvantaged situation. But not only that, nobody should have control of both sides of an equation. It's just not ethical. So I think that's step one. I think step two is, I call it leveling, or we call it leveling the playing field. When you take away all the rebate games and you take away all the spread games, what's left is who can provide the best service, who can provide the best value. And that's where we step in, because frankly, nobody can do what we're doing from a clinical perspective. Nobody has the technology we have. And what we do is a legitimate bona fide service, right? We have pharmacists intervening using technology to survey and look at what patients are prescribed. And like I said earlier, make sure patients are on the right therapies, partner with physicians. And that's a very valuable service that saves the sponsor money, but also ensures patients are on the right therapy, which then, as you know, John, impacts adherence downstream. And so, we see it as legislation, as as leveling the playing field. You asked the question on, what does this look like this year? Unfortunately, not sure. I don't think anybody really knows. It seems like both sides of the aisle agree that reform is needed, but don't want to agree on anything right now, given our political environment. So, you can all agree that something's right, but if you don't want to partner up and push something across, then nothing gets done. So I think the next chance for something real to happen is at the end of this year. And so we are watching. Impurex is actively engaged and talking to senators and giving our position and enabling our model, making sure they're educated on our model. So I think one place where legislators kind of fail is very good at calling out some of the gaps, but not good at presenting an alternative. And I think we are a very welcomed alternative that they need to be up to speed on. So
I think it's so interesting how you've mentioned several times clinical services and how that feature of what you do, at the end of the day improves patient outcomes. And that's, I think, music to the ears of the change. You're going this extra step that I don't think is being offered in this space very often.
We're trying to manage pharmacy benefits. And so a PBM that approves 97, percent of prior authorizations because they just want to rubber stamp stuff and get volume out the door because they make their money on the number of, rebates and spread. So they're incentivized to push as much medication out the door as possible. So they're misaligned. Our PA approval levels are below 70% because we're really stopping and saying, do you need this drug? Is this the right therapy for you? Is there something better for you? And I think, people appreciate that. When I joined Imperex, I remember seeing the pharmacists at the center walking in and saying, wow, they figured it out. They've been able to figure out, a recipe where employers value what pharmacists do and are willing to pay for it. And then the second thing I thought is, I want this for my family. I want a pharmacist behind the scenes looking at what my little girls are prescribed, what my wife is prescribed to make sure that, my kids and my wife are on the right therapies, my parents. I think in today's world, you can go visit 5 physicians today and get prescribed 5 separate things, and they don't even know, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Whereas our pharmacists would catch when there's an interaction, our pharmacists would catch when you have one medication aggravating a condition that you're trying to treat with another medication. That's the beauty of the model.
Again, that continuing theme of the team approach to care, which I know the community pharmacy really wants to rally around. All right, so one last question. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen next. So in the year ahead, what major changes in the PBM business do you think we could see? In the next year or the next year or two, what does the crystal ball tell us or tell you?
Yeah. Well, I'm hopeful that reform does pass, and we will keep on pushing for that. And I think that does turn everything on its head, and which will be very exciting as the landscape is kind of cleared and everybody sees, the true math equation of what PBM is. Separate from that, I would say, we couldn't be more excited about our new big partner coming on board in a very strategic channel for us. So that is not just a partnership and them being a customer of ours. That is a partnership on trying to evolve the industry. And so, I love that they stepped up. I encourage others to talk to them once we announce it to understand how they got to that answer, because they broke with precedents, right? Most people are with the big 3. You said it 80% plus because it's comfortable and it's a safe space, but, these guys saw that there is something better out there. I think, we're going to get more people engaged, more, hopefully more chain drugstores, more grocers into this model. And then let's get crazy and look at these networks and see how we can blow that up together and reinvent the whole PBM space. And so for everybody that's out there all the time going to Capitol Hill, making noise about reimbursement, you have leverage here. Let's capitalize on that. Let's use it, because I promise you start taking patients away from the PBMs, these abusive PBMs, you're going to catch their eye. They're going to listen. So I think I'm hopeful that's what 2025 looks like. We're going to make a lot of noise. We're going to energize a lot of people and hopefully, start pushing things in the right direction.
All right. Well, Imperex Health, Danny Sanchez, John Ridyard, taking a more team-based approach and providing the clinical services that at the end of the day improve the patient outcomes. And that's why we're all here. Thank you so much. Let's do this again after NACDS annual, when we can talk more about the changes that are coming our way and the way you guys are helping to make that happen. Thank you.